Welcome, everyone. I'm Dave Klein, and welcome to the Simulate Cybersecurity broadcast. This one is called Cybersecurity Must-Haves for your 2023 wish list with Magda Chelly. How you doing, Magda? How are you today?
Hi, Dave. I'm very good. Thank you. How are you?
Really good. Doing awesome. I always love talking to you. You always learn a lot. And today we're talking about something that's really important, the idea of businesses. I mean, businesses from Fortune 50 in the world to your corner store. You all need cybersecurity, right? But it really, whether you're huge or you're small, you make decisions on what you want to manage yourself, what to bring in, right? And there's decisions on what to select as far as cybersecurity. And then there's things that you don't pick up and don't use at all. And then there's other things you say, I need this, but I'm going to outsource it and have some expertise. We're going to do all sorts of conversations about how to make appropriate decisions when buying for cybersecurity, what to focus on, what to outsource, how to really build that relationship with the vendor and things like that very well. But first, I have to say, I'm totally jealous. Magda, you just came back from a 6-conference cybersecurity tour. That is awesome.
Yeah, absolutely, Dave. I was literally at some point not exactly sure where I was around the world. You know, the feeling when you travel a lot and you lose that contact with the reality. So I started my journey with Black Hat Middle East and Africa in Saudi Arabia, which was extremely exciting and a very big event. From there, I went to another conference in Poland, Advanced Threat Summit, where as well I was speaking, of course, about cybersecurity around the world. From Poland, I went to Istanbul, where I had the opportunity to speak about ransomware and cybersecurity. From Istanbul to Tunisia, to my old school, and that was very exciting, seeing very young students really motivated to start their journey and career in cybersecurity. And from Tunisia to Geneva to World Economic Forum event, and then lastly to Black Hat Europe in London, which is as well, or was very, very interesting and fascinating.
Very cool. That's awesome. Now, out of all those things that you told me, I did something that you did this year, which is go back to my high school and talk to the students. And that was mind-blowing. It was mind-blowing for a few reasons. One is the assistant principal was someone from my class. So I walked in and shook hands with her. So she's now the assistant principal of the school, meeting all the kids and hearing how excited they were about cybersecurity and things like that and asking questions. So that was so much fun and probably my favorite thing I did this year. So I'm so happy you're able to share that with kids in Tunisia as well. That's so cool.
Yeah, it was really exciting and very, very motivating as well. But seeing them really interested into cybersecurity, asking the right questions, asking about how to start a career, how to continue a career, which domain to choose, showed not only maturity into understanding that the field and the industry is evolving, but as well understanding that there are a lot of opportunities in our industry. So I was very happy to see all that.
Very cool. Very, very cool. So let's start our conversation about businesses and making good cybersecurity decisions on what to bring in and stuff like that, right? Let's start with business impact and outcomes. How do you sit there and look at your business and make decisions like that?
Well, I think, Dave, first of all, this is a very important question and often is not addressed in a way that aligns with the business objectives and goals. So I think I mentioned this already before when we talked about cyber risk quantification and the fact that businesses need to understand that the risks that they face with technology or cyber risk might affect their business operations and much more than just a server or a computer not working.
Correct.
So first, in a very traditional way, of course, it all comes down to having a very clear understanding of those risks. Now, having an understanding of the risk in itself, that task is still a challenge for us cybersecurity professionals because we tend to look at the word from our perspective, from the technical perspective,
right,
while the business is looking at the word from a business perspective, from increasing profits, from ensuring the right and the best customer journey to the best productivity, the best profitability, etc. So I think there is the gap that we need to close between cybersecurity and business, and ensuring that we implement the right risk scenarios when we start our risk assessment. And the risk scenarios concept is actually not a new concept, has been there in the risk industry for a very long time, but in not purely and technically implemented in cybersecurity. We often talk about very technical risk scenarios or risks when it comes to our industry, while risk scenarios are like stories. You would explain to a company how a specific threat that materializes and compromise the company will affect the company's operations or data security or data protection in a much better and holistic view that links the technical impacts with the business impacts. Is it a business interruption that will cause actually loss of revenue? Is it actually a non-compliance with the regulatory requirements that go beyond sometimes of just a fine for data breach? Is it paralysis of activities that will impact the customer journey as well as the customer reputation, the business reputation? So having those stories that represent the risk scenarios will help to focus on the biggest or the most critical ones. And the reason behind it is because obviously every company has an extensive list of risks, but in order to be more efficient and especially cost efficient, you need to focus on the ones that are the most critical for the business and do not align with the business risk appetite. Now, when you have that visibilities of risk scenarios and you understand the consequences that will impact the business itself, you can have that informed discussion with the business stakeholders and ask them what is acceptable to you and what is not acceptable to you. That will define that risk appetite that often, again, in cybersecurity is very hard to understand. Well, if we say to a business, you might be impacted by a ransomware, that doesn't allow them to tell you, okay, I don't want that, or I'm not comfortable with my business being interrupted for, let's say, 10 to 16 days. They don't understand the consequences of such a threat like ransomware. And once we start that discussion, we have the understanding of the risk appetite, we can identify in more details, not only the business impacts, but as well the controls that would help us to manage and mitigate the specific risk scenario to reach that point where it's acceptable by the business. And now that's a very critical point that we need to reach before any other decision that needs to be taken.
Agreed. I mean, that's really huge. And the whole point of right sizing security is understanding what is critical to the business. What if it disappears would be devastating, right? So the idea of business continuity is figuring out what is the most important things to keep and take care of, and what is it worth, right? And then in that way, you're building value for the cybersecurity because the business people will tell you this is important, this is not, this is critical. And the other thing too, which is important in this conversation, beyond finding out what the business risk appetite is, what is the most important and valuable things in the business, is also end user experience, right? Is the idea of how do I gain this security and extra and assurance that we're going to be okay and have business continuity, at the same time give us something that could be usable by everybody in an easy fashion.
Absolutely. The balance between usability and security is a topic that I do believe we don't address enough. You can actually build security controls that makes it very, very I would say secure. I don't want to use the word, but basically increasing the level of security of the company. However, you might find yourself in a situation where that will affect not only the customer journey, but as well the employee's experience and the employee's productivity. So the balance between security and usability is actually a science in itself, where and how to explain to the business when to take the risk and when not. It's our responsibility. But the moment that we address all those talks with very technical terms, we're actually not presenting the situation as well as the risk scenario in a proper manner that is understandable by people outside of our industry. Which actually leads, of course, to the next point, which is actually the wrong decisions, the wrong controls, or in an efficient manner addressing the requirements of the company to build a cybersecurity strategy and roadmap.
Yeah, it's really kind of critical. And you think about some of the technologies we have, often even in certain situations, identity access management is a great example. There are so many great solutions out there today that allow you to consolidate your identity into one store and really sit up and say, okay, I'm going to do role-based access control. Magda, you have rights to this. Dave, you have rights to this. Michael, you have rights to this, and do it in a way where they're not logging into everything every few seconds, or they're not, there's a different platform, so there's a different password or username, or this one uses this and the other thing. So you could very easily also, in some ways, in some of these security solutions, consolidate some of the things that are difficult for people, make it easier for people. And that's often in cybersecurity, we don't think of the ease of use part of it, but that's really kind of critical, like you said, to be able to do that and see where that is. So there's merits and benefits there as well.
Absolutely, because in that way, we are able to be the enabler for the business. Otherwise, we will face a rejection and low adoption from employees, from customers who will be complaining. That's the reality. They will be complaining, either the employees that they're unable to use critical applications, for example, to perform their activities, or customers that is very hard to access to the service. And that, of course, lead in a very simple example. If we're talking about SaaS platform, a churn. A churn means you're losing customers, and companies are actually evaluated on that KPI. So key performance indicator. Therefore, again, cybersecurity is really, or can be, a business enabler only if it understands the priorities and those very important performance that the business needs to achieve. Otherwise, we're going in two different directions, and we are implementing controls that we believe are actually right for us from our perspective, but we are not facilitating the life of the business, the employees, and the customers. And again, all that complexity that comes with integrating or implementing controls will be even further extrapolated because of the low adoption, because of the challenge with people complaining about the difficulty to use, or why do I get logged out every time that I try to use, for example, my email. Those are things that happen, and this is the reality of our world and our industry, is that often we really forget that, and we forget actually two areas. The customer journey is one, but the employee's journey is as well extremely important.
Yes.
If you have an IT administrator that is unable to perform their tasks because they only are able to access to certain assets when they are in the office, you will actually have a lot of challenges as well as complaints, and they will blame that for security. And I'm using the word blame specifically because we don't want to be in that situation. The decision that we take as security professionals need to be, again, for the third time that I'm saying or using this word, enablers for the business, ensuring that the activities, operations continue in a secure and private way as it should be.
Excellent. That's very well said. And beyond that, one thing that we talk about in cybersecurity a lot of things today are as a service, right? You think about no one runs their own database of customers. They use Salesforce.com, or there's actually a few other ones, by the way. I mean, I mentioned them, but there's a few other ones as well. If you're running business applications, you don't make your own using SAP. In dealing with cybersecurity too, there's so much that you could do yourself and what we could outsource. So let's talk about that for a second. Looking at cybersecurity, how do you decide what to run and what to outsource?
First of all, of course, it's really important to have that visibility of which controls make sense for a specific risk scenario. When you have that visibility, a control can or represent either a process, either people awareness, or either a technological tool. So this is a very first, I would say, or second step after your risk assessment. Now, when you have that visibility, I think one of the very critical steps is to ensure that you understand what you currently have within the company. Very often, enterprises, especially when they have implemented already certain solutions, they actually don't have enough visibility on what they can leverage already. They might have, for example, tools that allow them data loss protections already, but it's not activated, or it requires a specific, very low increase in licensing. So I think before going into, oh, I need to contract with new vendors immediately, I need to buy all those tools, let's understand what is required for risk scenarios and what do I have currently in my company that I can leverage. When I have achieved that visibility, I will have a visibility of gaps. And I will then be able to understand if that makes sense for me to outsource or address internally based not only on my budget, but as well resources. I think with so many security initiatives, often, especially when it comes to managed services, it's perceived like, oh, I'm going to ask this vendor to do everything and they will do everything for me, own as well the risk, and I will not need to do anything at all. I will just watch.
And they'll do it better and be more concerned about it than I will be concerned about my own.
Yes, exactly.
They're a third party, but they're going to be more careful and more cognizant of my business than myself. We all know that's not real.
Exactly. That's absolutely not real. And especially it's not real, Dave, when you actually are not paying millions and millions of dollars for the service and for having like the aligned SLAs with your expectations. Let's be very objective. A business is there to generate revenue, right? So if you're asking your managed service provider to take all those liabilities and to, on top of that, care about your business more than you, well, they will ask you to pay for it. Yeah. There is no other solution, right? And that means that one, you would need to have that price tag aligned with your expectations, but also what is often forgotten is that you will need to have everything very clearly described and aligned in terms not only of services, what you are actually expecting from the vendors, but as well as I mentioned and used the term SLAs, service level agreements, what they really have in terms of responsibilities and what are they, I would say, required to answer to in which time frames. It cannot be in a way that it's a very high level word and then they will do it without those details. The more details you have in your contracts, the more you understand how much control you have over that service or product that you're buying from the vendor, and especially in alignment again with the costs that you are paying for. Now, this also, go on.
And it compounds itself. What you make, it's very insightful. It compounds itself. It goes back to our very beginning of the conversation about, if I say, let's say my business is CAD/CAM designs of heavy machinery, right? If I decide to outsource that security to a company, that's my crown jewels. And I would have to say, hey, listen, if I don't have my CAD/CAM capability, I can't make money. So therefore, I need to understand the value of that. And maybe this is something I need to watch at a closer level. And then on top of that, the SLA, as you said, is going to be much more draconian and expensive on something that is so important, right? And the key is, you're right, you don't leave anything to chance. It's not a situation where you just throw the baby over to a caretaker and not see what's going on. You want to know what's going on, and you need to be able to be the educated consumer to do that. Absolutely.
And of course, Dave, it facilitates the communication and alignment of expectations. So rather than, having to fight the fire when it happens afterwards, when there is a problem, because at the end, that's when we look at the contracts. Let's be realistic. I really think that contracts are there, not when everything goes well, but we look at the contracts when something goes wrong.
Right.
And then when something goes wrong, you need to be able to have that discussion with your vendor or your supplier and understand how they eventually missed the SLAs, or if they didn't, how you were not clear about your expectations. So it facilitates the communication, it facilitates the resolving of any challenges, and especially as well, it actually addresses any data breach or incident, which also is very often missing in specific contracts when it comes to who and how is going to manage a data breach or a compromise that starts with the vendor, services, or products. So again, an area that I don't think we have enough maturity around the word to address yet. So it's really, those are some points that are related to that. But again, if I take a step back, the more you have clearly defined roles and responsibilities, as well as expectations in your contract when it comes to SLAs, the better the outcome will be, and as well, the better the success of the project will be. You will have control, but as well, you will be able to understand the fine line between your responsibility and the responsibility of the vendor, because no one is able to take better care of your baby, like you gave the example, than yourself.
Exactly.
And a business will remain your business. The risks will be your risk. They will not be transferred to someone randomly or a managed service provider for you unless you pay the heavy price with it.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's really kind of important. And by the way, even if it's a situation where you decide in your business, I'm going to outsource something that's less important, the desktop and VDI and end user experience, right? You know, that the tier one help desk, right? Even in situations like that, you still have expectations of your employees, of your customers. If they can't get, you know, if they have an email address only or a phone number to contact someone and they're not there, there's no SLAs around that, it still affects the business. So even if it's a situation where you don't give them control of the greater things that you have, it's still important to come up with the SLAs and things like that. Another thing it's kind of important too, I think that you talked about also was that visibility to begin with, right? You know, on the risks, on the risk appetite, on what's the crown jewels, and then also what do I currently have, and can I take advantage of it to the most? We just did a survey at Simulate of 1,009 globally IT professionals. And what we found is we were asking about concerns about the conflict in the Ukraine and Russia, and among other places, among other things, and the economy. And what really bothered them was the economy. But what they said about it was, we're looking to consolidate and take our cybersecurity solutions and get more out of them, right? So there's the idea of taking advantage of what we have currently and get rid of disparate systems and choose things that are suites that are easier to run. And so that's also important, is to realize in that appetite for new cybersecurity or existing, is realizing what you can run successfully without problems and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the scenarios that I have seen as well happening is companies, for example, going on tenders and listing a whole list of controls and saying, hey, you guys manage all that for me. I honestly would be scared tremendously to give all the keys of my kingdom to some company
Yeah.
outside of my control. It's
Sure.
like basically leaving your house to some strangers and asking them to have complete access to everything, including your crown jewels, with basically expensive jewelry or expensive furniture or high tech or whatever you have in your house, and then going
My favorite
away.
chair. My favorite chair.
Yeah,
It doesn't
exactly.
have to
And then
be,
going
you know, a watch. It could be my chair. I love my chair the way it is. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and then going away and saying, no, I'm sure they're gonna take care of it. And then, while you're away, some robbers come in and steal your furniture. And the people who were in charge of the security of your house told you, or the management of the house told you, well, sorry, we couldn't do anything. We weren't there. The contract said that we are from 9 to 6, and that's where we monitored. And you didn't want to pay for CCTV, so you just go to the police and make a report. So I think again, like having that perception that giving the responsibility to a third party, to a vendor with complete security oversight is actually very misleading, because companies associate that with transferring the risk, and the risk still
Correct.
remains
Correct.
with them. So
Correct.
if something happens, people will not say, or customers will not say, hey, oh no, that's not their fault, that's the vendor fault. No, the data will be leaked from you, from your customers. The reputation of the business will be impacted, not specifically for the vendor. Especially it might not be at the beginning, because it needs, of course, to be publicly disclosed, etc., which might take time. So the first impact is immediate on the company itself.
Correct. Correct. Right. And people forget that. And that's really kind of critical. At the same time, what's in this discussion, what's important to understand is that in most situations around the world today, with cybersecurity being the skill sets being at a premium, right? We're always looking for people in cybersecurity. There's not enough people in cybersecurity. You're still going to be in a situation where you need to be the owner of your business and the one who cares the most, but you're still going to have to negotiate something that someone else that outsources that you outsource for, right? Whether it's a situation of you're a company, you're in a rural area, and there's not a lot of people with cybersecurity skills. You're gonna take chances with hire some people, hope they come up to speed. You're still gonna have to outsource some of it, but in some ways, even in situations where you need that third party, you need to know that they're sitting at your table and it's your, and you need to figure out what the rules are. What is the rule of engagement? What is, how's risk handled? What are the SLAs and things like that to make it happen?
Absolutely. And I think, Dave, when we talk about this outsourcing, I'm in no way saying that it's a bad thing. Of course, if you have limited resources, you will need to seek the expertise somewhere else. So the point being is when you have a clear visibility of your risk scenarios, if I go back to what I said at the beginning, plus the associated controls, and you have done your exercise of consolidating and looking at what you have already, then you can understand your capabilities, resources, budget, and make an informed decision. Do I have the capability to do this internally? If I don't, who I will work with? So this also is the next step. Like, would I actually look at all the controls that I don't have and then give them all to one vendor? Or will I actually diversify to ensure that I don't have a single point of failure and I'm also able to have a different level of, I would say, expertise, different level of access, and might actually help to manage my risk? This is also a question that comes into the picture. Oftentimes, we perceive that it's better to have one vendor when it comes to certain areas of IT, but that in itself brings a very high risk. If that vendor goes down because of compromise, because of data breach, because of any impact on their operations, that means that all your operations will be as well interrupted, especially if you have depending technology on that specific vendor. So the question is, I want to outsource. I reach, for example, that decision that there's a part of my controls that I feel actually comfortable outsourcing, but would I actually outsource all of those controls with one vendor, or I will choose several vendors I will vet for their expertise in that specific area and ensure that they have the best service or product for that particular control, rather than going with a simple solution. I will just dump everything into one contract, and then with very low visibility or control over not only my expectations, but as well over the SLAs.
Well, what it is it's a good lesson. Like you talked about contracts. Too often we look at contracts when there's a problem, not when we first start. And the idea is if you're outsourcing things, the joking about the baby over the fence, the key is it's still your baby, right? So the point is that even, if the point is if that company disappears, if they have a power outage, how do they handle things? If their data center in AWS East goes down, they have AWS West, are diversified? Are you able to find other places to come into? That's part of the situation is if something's so important, what happens if they disappear? Just as if your own IT stuff disappears, what does that do to the business? It's the same as if that IT stuff disappears too.
And here, Dave, another very important point, and I think extremely critical, especially in Asia. A big brand or a known brand does not mean necessarily greater security than a smaller company or equivalent security. It is really the responsibility of the company to perform a due diligence of their suppliers slash vendors to understand if they are able to actually hold the service continuously. Like you mentioned, what happens if there is a power outage? Do not assume, unless it's written black on white, you cannot assume as a company buying service or product from a vendor just because of a brand that you heard that they have everything in place. This is really a very big misconception. Now, certain companies, because of their presence and brand, might have additional resources and budgets, but that does not mean that they have the right security controls for the service and the product that they're selling to you. It does not mean as well that you don't have the right to ask as well for additional security controls specific to what you're buying from them, from what you're implementing. And maybe as well, you can get more visibility and control as well. Maybe there are other things that you will need to put in place to mitigate certain gaps. So again, assumption that because it's a big company, that specifically or inherently means great security and no need for me to do anything. It's a very, very bad misconception. It can lead to tremendous mistakes into vetting the vendors and doing a proper due diligence. Usually that should be done before going into implementing and signing the contract. But let's be honest, it happens very often that the cybersecurity due diligence comes afterwards when the vendor has been already chosen. And then the question afterwards is just, oh, we actually have a risk here. How do we manage it? This is common as well in this part of the world, but I think around the world, we don't have yet a maturity to consider cyber risk as a decision-making factor in the choice of the suppliers, of the vendors, which hopefully is changing, but still slowly, in my view.
It's slowly. It's getting there, but still very slowly. It's not the same as in other industries yet, but we're getting there, you know. But some things also I think it's important in making decisions for your company on what to do, what to buy, what to outsource, what to consolidate. What's also really kind of important is I find those that go out there and are part of the organizations that do, you know, that have multiple, people from your industry, from, peers. And that way you could say, if it's this one vendor X, for example, hey, I use them on a project to do SIM aggregation. What do you think of them? Had some problems with that. I actually prefer this one. Or, hey, you know what? The SIM aggregation is great, but we're really going for technology like Swimlane. There's a company called Swimlane out there that automates and actually responses, right? We found that was more important to do SOAR than to actually, the SIM part of it there. And we have a company we love for that. So the key is, I think, the peer-to-peer understanding of what people are doing is kind of critical.
Oh, absolutely, Dave. And especially when it comes to products in cybersecurity. So we have seen how many new products we have in the market. And if we look at the new startups and new products that we have every day, it's really extremely overwhelming for everyone, including, of course, in general, our peers and CISOs. Like, you don't have the time to review every single solution for every control. Let's be honest. Otherwise, you would need to have a full team of researchers who are going to spend their time to research, or you're going to buy the service for companies that do that and specialize in that. And we know that there are many in the market that actually perform a review of products, and they try to help you choose specific products. But even that, it requires budget, it requires time, and it's not that easy. The best way is going into communities and really getting feedback from peers and having a little bit more, really closed door conversations as well, where you know that you have this trust. And I think in our industry, that would definitely help to share knowledge and share more insights. We learn from each other. So there's no one who knows it all. And by asking, what did you think about this tool? What were the pros, the cons, where and how did you use it the most efficiently? It's good. But as well, a last point is, how did the budget increase with scalability, which is also something that sometimes we don't consider when we are in a just acquisition phase, where we don't need, for example, many licenses, but then we realize that, oh, actually, when we scale, the cost becomes very high. Another point that I wanted to add here, and the last point around this question is, I have seen now, and these are not security tools, but actually tools that are, for example, for customer relationship management or others, that do not include security in the license, in the basic license. You actually need to pay additional fees to get that security included and available. So that's a massive impact on the budget. If you as a CISO come in and you have a security budget, and then that doesn't consider those licenses, you actually might be in a very challenging situation, I would say, because some of them are very expensive.
And another thing I thought of too, you saw me, I checked my phone a moment ago. I've had 24 broadcasts this year, but it was going to happen. My wife didn't know that I was doing a broadcast right now. I was like, hey, where are you? Where are you? But this brings up a good point. Also today, the thing with cybersecurity is it's where we all are, which is everywhere these days, right? We're not necessarily in an office. We're on a train. We're commuting somewhere. We are in our homes, and we're using these devices as much as we use our laptops and websites that we go for the business. But it's also kind of critical for people when they try to look at their cybersecurity spend. Is where are my people? Where are they? And what we're going to find out today is it's a loose federation of your employees working from anywhere, right? And your partners, your business partners, your suppliers, your bank, and everything's interconnected. So what's also, I think, kind of important here, and when we talk about cybersecurity, it's not just our own cybersecurity. It's not only the stuff that we manage, the stuff we choose to outsource. It's the fact that my bank is tied into my accounts payable directly because we save money if we do that. But they're in my database and they can see these kind of things. So how do I mitigate problems if they get hacked? I have customers who want a good customer experience, and I may allow them to do all sorts of things. But what if they're on a phone that has a hijacked browser, right? And how do I make sure that they're still going to feel confident about my business and that we're not going to let them get hacked, even though they're not my employee, they're my customer, right? So you have this whole new world out there, which is also something that people have to take advantage of and understand.
Yeah, and I think, Dave, we're moving away from our own cybersecurity to the ecosystem cybersecurity. I talk about it more and more often because we cannot assume that our responsibility is only protecting ourselves. So we don't have any more a perimeter. We're working with vendors, with clients. Everyone is connected, and everyone has access to technology that might get disrupted and compromised. So we are extrapolating this risk within our ecosystem. So we need to assume that this kind of compromise, data breach, cyber attack can come from anywhere within our ecosystem. It cannot be only a vendor, it might be as well a customer. It might be a partner, not only a supplier or vendor. So how do we have that visibility? How are we able today to assume that we are protecting our digital assets and putting in place the right security controls, making the right decisions about our cybersecurity strategy if we don't understand how much dependency we have reached, not only technologically, but as well within our interconnected ecosystem in the cyberspace? We need to realize that. And the more we realize that, the better we start to understand that we cannot protect everything, that we need the support of others in the ecosystem. And for that, we need to understand where are our major risk scenarios, not just threats, scenarios and stories that will really impact our operations, business compliance, business activities. When we have that, we are on a healthy journey to a cybersecurity resilience. And of course, that means that we understand as well that we're going to be breached. And we talk about it all the time, but having an incident response with all those suppliers and vendors is as well something that is missing. We did not address that previously, but Dave, like when you have a contract and you sign the service managed provider and you actually are paying really heavy pricing for that, what happens when something happens and you're compromised or they are compromised, not only from perspective of the contract, but do you have actually an incident response plan that involves your vendor or your supplier? Very often also an area that hasn't been addressed properly, hasn't been actually tested properly, especially around the testing. Who's the person to contact? Who needs to be involved? Who's going to make the decisions? It's only when, things hit the fan and then everyone is panicking. What should we do? Too late. Every hour means loss of revenue for the business.
Agreed. Do it up front. An ounce is better than a pound for fixing something that's already broken. Agreed, 200%. And by the way, the other thing I think is the final thing in closing, security can enable, right? And you think of all the cool things that we could do today. The fact that you were able to travel 6 different cybersecurity places around the world real quick, come here with me on my show across the globe. It's opening the world to all technologies, opening the world to all sorts of things. You have the news today that the U.S. national labs have figured out fusion, right? In a lab, it's only in a lab. It needs to be done 1,000 times greater to make it successful. But cheap and clean energy. So the other thing is finally, it really is an enabler for all sorts of things, which is really kind of cool. So Magda Chelly, thank you so much for attending today. This has been so awesome. Always love having you here. It's great.
Thank you so much, Dave. I wanted as a closing remark to add one thought that came to my mind with, of course, the popularity of AI and all those tools that generate code. So I want to leave our audience with this scenario where basically your developers, software developers, are using an AI tool to generate code, and that code includes malicious code, but they have no idea.
Yeah. Really important. So thanks so much. Really appreciate it. This has been the Simulate Cybersecurity broadcast. Have a great evening. All right.